People have called you the real Tony Stark. You've got your finger in so many different advanced technologies.
After he invented PayPal, that motherfucker made a car. While he's doing the car, he's shooting rockets into space and drilling holes into the ground. He's making these massive solar panel power battery plants that fix their energy needs. He's on another level.
Are you sincerely trying to save the world?
Well, I'm trying to do good things, yeah.
And you're a billionaire. Seems a little bit like either superhero or supervillain. You have to choose one.
The things that seem quite clear and obvious to me, and I don't understand why they aren't so obvious to everyone.
Elon is one of the most successful businessmen in the world, so obviously understands things that most people don't. But what are these things and where did he learn them from? I have spent over 300 hours digging into this, and within the next 30 minutes, I will share the most valuable lessons I discovered leading to his success. Each lesson is backed by real events from Elon's life, starting from when he was just a kid until he became the richest man in the world.
I think when I was 5 or 6 or something, I thought I was insane.
Why'd you think you were insane?
Welcome to another 5 Minutes with Elon Musk. I'm Annika, clinical psychologist. Is there any example that you could give us where you perceived Elon as different from other children?
I was at work one day and I got this telephone call from the school that Elon was at saying that could I come and see the principal? Why do I have to see the principal? I went to the school and there were 2 people in there, the principal and this teacher. She had spectacles and she was wringing her hands. And I said, well, what is it? Of course, I was expecting the worst. And she said, there's something wrong with Elon.
They might like put me away or something.
You thought that?
For a second, yes.
When you were little?
Yeah, and they put people away. What if they put me away?
Like when you were little, you thought this?
Yes.
Wow.
I said, what? And she said, he just sits and stares out of the window all the time. In a fixed position, he just sits and stares out of the window. And no matter what she does, if she calls him, he doesn't respond. And she says that she's been up to him and shaken him. And then he sort of turned to her. He said to her, the leaves are turning brown.
Their mind wasn't exploding with ideas all the time.
They said, we think he's retarded.
Like you thought if they find out I got this stream coming in.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was like, that's strange.
The various things you've been able to accomplish in a very short amount of time. And you're constantly doing this. You're a weird person, right?
I agree. I think it's possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary. When I grew up, the things were very violent. In South Africa, it was a very violent place. I was bookish, so I was like reading a lot of books and kind of a nerd basically. And I was like a late bloomer from a size standpoint. So I was like small, relatively speaking. I was like almost the smallest kid in the grade. So I never started a fight or anything, but I had a lot of fights I didn't want to be in from when I was 6 to 16.
What, like people picking on you and shit, or?
Yeah. Been in like real hardcore street fights. I got beaten up really badly in a few of them actually. People say like they're worried about words and stuff. People who are worried about words never been punched in the face. You've been punched in the face real hard, right on the nose, man, any words rather than that. Being small and having some violent bullies is a bad situation, Certainly toughen you up, that's for sure. And around age 16 is when they stopped trying to beat me out because it didn't work out well for them. Tried it, I knocked the guy out.
Damn. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Elon.
I'm experienced now. Only last week, I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick. I'm so mean, I make medicine sick. Bad dude. Bad.
I did not have a happy childhood, to be frank. It was quite rough. But I read a lot of books, lots and lots of books. Gradually, I sort of understood more from the books that I was reading and watched a lot of movies.
Growing up, Elon spent most of his time being by himself. He once commented about it and said, I didn't really have a primary nanny or anything. I just had a housekeeper who was there to make sure I didn't break anything. She wasn't like watching me. I was raised by books and then my parents.
It took me a while to understand things that most people intuitively understand. I would just tend to take things very literally as just like the words as spoken were exactly what they meant. But then that that turned out to be wrong.
Even though the books helped Elon escape the thoughts of bullies and feelings of loneliness, making new friends was difficult. So at 10 years old, he decided to make a move that would come to change his life. Elon and his siblings have spent most of the time living with their single mom May, but in a Rolling Stones article, Elon opens up about feeling empathy for his father at the time and said, "I felt sorry for my father because my mother had all 3 kids. He seemed very sad and lonely by himself, so I thought I could be company." Elon then moved in with his father in another neighborhood in South Africa, but this ended up being a bad decision coming from a good place. He then goes on saying, "But I didn't really understand at the time what kind of person he was." Elon's father, Elon Musk, is a complicated man. Elon himself have stated, "My dad will have a carefully thought out plan of evil." Without going into conspiracy, here are some publicly known facts about Elon Musk. He has been convicted for manslaughter for having shot and killed 3 people, but was later released in self-defense. In 2017, he had a child with his 42-year younger stepdaughter, followed by another in 2022. Elon's mother and siblings have all stated that Errol was physically and mentally abusive, and everyone, including Elon, have severed their relationship with him. You probably agree that Errol doesn't fit the description of an ideal father, but remember, Elon was only 10, and like most kids growing up with an abusive parent, they find ways to justify their actions in order to protect the relationship. And besides this, Errol was also a brilliant engineer, which was something that young Elon admired. He have even stated that most of his engineering skills comes from his father. But he then goes on saying, "He was such a terrible human being, you have no idea." All this paints a clear picture that Elon's teenage years were undoubtedly very painful. We all know that figuring out your place in life as a young teenager is already challenging enough, but Elon had to do that while simultaneously coping with loneliness, bullies, and an abusive father.
Freud said, for example, that no one could be a man unless his father had died. And Jung said, yes, but that death can take place symbolically. They're always concerned about what their father would think or whether their father approves of him. Jung would say, well, you haven't exactly separated out the God image from your parents, but you have to let that image of perfection go, and that exposes you.
When I was growing up, I did have this existential crisis where I was like, what's the meaning of life? Is this all pointless? Is there any point in existing at all? I read the various religious texts. I read a bunch of the philosophers. I just couldn't really seem to find any good answers. And then I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is really a book on philosophy, but it's disguised as a book on humor. And the point Douglas Adams was making is that the purpose of life is to learn more, to ultimately learn what questions to ask about the answer that is the universe. That's the actual point, is to figure out the point. And that answered my existential crisis, philosophy, basically. I'd read lots of books. They were very often set in the United States, and it seemed like a lot of new technology was being developed in the United States. So I thought, okay, I really want to work on new technology, so I want to get to Silicon Valley. When I was growing up, Silicon Valley seemed like some sort of mythical place, like Mount Olympus or something.
Elon is now a 17-year-old kid with the dream of making it to the US. But going alone is a big step, so he asked his father to go with him. But Errol doesn't like the idea, and instead, he tries to reinforce Elon's insecurities by saying, "If you go, you will soon be back and you will never make anything of yourself." Elon has been living mostly with his father for the past 7 years, so even though the relationship is unhealthy, he still seeks his father's advice. Because Errol was, after all, a successful engineer, well-traveled, and knew a lot more about the world than young Elon.
And that's partly why people are often willing to maintain a tyrant-slave relationship with their father. It's like there's always someone who knows what to do. There's always someone standing between you and the unknown.
Despite his father's attempt to keep Elon under his thumb, Elon still left to pursue studies in Canada so he later could move into the US. To better understand the relationship between Elon and his father, I have singled out some statements from Errol, revealing his cold, unorthodox and rather manipulative nature, which very likely influenced Elon growing up.
As far as being proud of a child, let me quote Solomon from the Bible. Solomon, pride goes before a fall. You do not walk around being proud of yourself or of your children. I mean, that is asking for trouble from our Creator. He he's not as far ahead as he would like to be at this time. He would have preferred to be where he is now, maybe 5 years ago. And he's trying very hard to push the schedule. I actually said to people 20 years ago, he won't stop until he's number one. It's about being, as far at the front as you can be, like running a marathon.
And are you proud of Elon?
Well, again, I'm not going to say I'm proud of Elon or any of my children because I'm asking for trouble and I don't want trouble from my maker.
Now, combine this attitude with the notion that the only people that Elon's father seems to praise were famous historical leaders. And it's very easy to imagine how this could inspire young Elon to strive for historical greatness.
I always look for feedback from an historical context, which is books, basically. Like something like Franklin's autobiography.
Elon was studying at university. One of his subjects was ancient history, and he would send me underlined or highlighted sections of books on Alexander the Great. The two of us entered into lengthy discussions about Alexander the Great and how amazing this individual was. A real, you could say, perhaps alien, like Napoleon.
This kind of goes back to college where I was trying to figure out what are the things that would most affect the future of humanity. And the things that I thought would most affect the future would be the internet, sustainable energy, which is both production and consumption, and space exploration, and specifically making life multiplanetary. That's the thread that connects them. It's like my best guess at what would most likely affect the future in the biggest way. Summer of '95, I was looking at the internet and it seemed to me like the internet was going to have a big effect on humanity. I thought, well, I can either work on electric vehicle technology and do my PhD at Stanford and watch the internet get built, or I could put my studies on hold and try to be part of the internet. And at first I tried to get a job at Netscape because that was the only internet company. And they didn't respond to me. So then I was like, okay, if I can't get a job at the only internet company, then I better try starting something. I talked to my professor and I said, look, I'm going to try starting a company. I'm probably not going to succeed. I said I'll probably be back in 6 months. And he said he's probably never going to hear from me again, and he was correct. So I started a company with my brother and a friend of mine, Greg Curry, and the three of us created Zip2, where the initial idea was to create software that could help bring the media companies online. So we helped, in a small way, bring companies like the New York Times, Hearst, Knight Ridder, and so forth online.
Musk and his brother started Zip2 by living at their office, which was far from a fancy place. Musk focused on developing the software while his brother did sales. And one of the early employees said, Musk never seemed to leave the office. He slept, not unlike a dog, on a beanbag next to his desk. Musk asked our first employees of Zip2 to give him a kick when they arrived, and he'd wake up and get back to work. As their service morphed into an actual product that could be used, they invited investors. And once again, the early employee noticed how the investors bought into Musk's slavish devotion and said, even then, Elon had this drive that this thing, whatever it was, had to get done, and if he didn't do it, he missed his shot. I think that is what the VC saw, that he was willing to stake his existence on building this platform. Elon even told one of the venture capitalists, my mentality is that of a samurai, I rather commit seppuku than fail. And 3 years later, in 1999, Compaq bought Zip2 for $307 million, and at the age of 28, Elon made $22 million.
Just 3 years ago, I was showering at the Y and sleeping on the office floor. And now, obviously I've got a $1 million car.
There it is, gentlemen, the fastest car in the world.
It's just a moment in my life.
I could go and buy one of the islands in the Bahamas and turn it into my personal fiefdom. Wow. I'm much more interested in trying to build and create a new company.
So this is an ATM. What we're going to do is transform the traditional banking industry.
Right after selling Zip2, Elon invested most of his money into his next venture, X.com, an online banking startup that later became PayPal. And as the largest shareholder, Elon's wealth skyrocketed when eBay 3 years later acquired the company for $1.5 billion. And at the age of 31, Elon made another $180 million.
Receiving cash is cash. I mean, those are just a large number of Ben Franklins.
I decided to look for something else to do. Why I originally came out to Silicon Valley was to study energy physics. The next company that I do, one of the things that I think would be important is that it has some long-term beneficial effect. It goes back to college, where the things that I thought would most affect the future would be the internet, sustainable energy, space exploration, and specifically making life multiplanetary. When I started SpaceX, I thought there's no way one could possibly start a rocket company. I wasn't that crazy. I thought, well, what is a way to increase NASA's budget? That was actually my initial goal. I thought, well, if we can do a low-cost mission to Mars, something called Mars Oasis, which would land seeds in dehydrated nutrient gel, and you hydrate them upon landing. And then you'd have this great sort of money shot of green plants on a red background. This would be the first life on Mars, the furthest that life's ever traveled, as far as we know. And I thought, well, that would get people really excited, therefore increase NASA's budget. So I went to Russia 3 times to look at buying a refurbished ICBM, because that was the best deal. It was very weird going there in late 2001, 2002, saying, I'd like to buy 2 of your biggest rockets, but you can keep the nuke. After making several trips to Russia, I came to the conclusion that my initial impression was wrong, that there's not enough will to explore and expand beyond Earth and have a Mars base and that kind of thing. That was wrong. In fact, there's plenty of will, particularly in the United States. But if people think it's impossible or it's going to completely break the federal budget, then they're not going to do it. I said, okay, well, what we really need to do here is try to solve the space transport problem. This was against the advice of pretty much everyone I talked to. One friend made me sit down and watch a bunch of videos of rockets blowing up.
Despite the naysayers, Elon started researching and contacting people with knowledge on how to build rockets. And 1 year later, in 2002, Elon started SpaceX with a small group of hand-picked engineers.
So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing. First principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world, and what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, okay, what are we sure as possible is true? And then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy.
Elon used first principle thinking to calculate the manufacturing price for rockets, and it made him realize that there was a much cheaper way to produce them. But the idea was only proven true on paper. Elon had no experience with physical manufacturing at this point. But he was a tough, well-read, risk-tolerant developer with extraordinary high aspirations, and enough money to try to make the impossible possible.
Franklin's pretty awesome. I would say certainly he's one of the people I most admire. Edison was certainly a role model, probably one of the biggest role models.
Did you study Edison's life?
Yeah, I read books about him, absolutely. As far as role models, the great technologists, Steve Jobs at Apple, I actually thought Disney was a pretty good innovator.
What is one thing that Franklin, Edison, Jobs and Disney all have in common?
You do both behind the scenes as well as in front of the camera. Is that correct? Am I to believe?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I think it's Walt Disney.
You're right.
Walt Disney is today most remembered for his creations such as Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse.
Pardon me, Mr. Disney, but could I have your autograph?
Oh, sure, hold this one.
Okay.
But this man was also a genius when it came to branding himself alongside his creations. He strategically placed himself signing autographs and being praised during his television show. And as the reach of his empire grew, so did his public image. Another man who learned this is no other than Steve Jobs, as he repeatedly placed himself as the genius behind the releases. And even though he was far from the most technically gifted person at Apple, he managed to skillfully brand himself into becoming a well-known technology icon. If you want to learn more from another world-class businessman after this one, you can check out my documentary on Jobs. And if you like my style of content, please take a quick moment to like this video so I can keep on making more.
I'm a bigger fan of Edison than Tesla, because Edison brought his stuff to market and made those inventions accessible to the world.
And how do you think he accomplished this? Obviously, Edison was also a master at marketing himself. By constantly putting on shows and nurturing a close relationship with the press, he in return exposed his inventions to the world. But now, let's move on to the greatest marketing genius of them all, Benjamin Franklin. Already at 23 years old, he had his own newspaper and printing shop, which taught him the powers of media influence. And later in life, as the American Revolution broke out, He was well known for his writing and inventions, which is why he got sent to France to negotiate an alliance. He was, at the time, the only internationally well-known American, and as he arrived in Paris, the rumor spread quickly that the famous Benjamin Franklin was in town. The French people loved him, and his face could be seen everywhere on clay medallions, pictures, sculpture and prints. He even sent a letter to his daughter at the time saying, "Your father's face is now as well known as that of the moon." Franklin's influence won the French people over, which became an essential move in winning the war. It's not a coincidence that all these men, despite their inventions, were so influential, because they all understood one thing better than anyone else, which is that opinion decides where power resides. And as Winston Churchill said, there is no such thing as public opinion, there is only published opinion. All these men understood well that you can reverse engineer power by media exposure, and Elon understands this all too well.
Elon Musk, thank you so much for being with us at Wired Science, CEO of SpaceX and chairman of Tesla Motors.
Yeah, I got other titles, but that's about right.
Mr. Musk, how are you?
Congratulations on the promotion.
Thank you.
You gotta be kidding me. You're Elon Musk. I am?
It's an honor to be hosting Saturday Night Live.
Elon Musk?
Yeah.
Tesla Elon Musk?
Yeah.
Wow.
Elon Musk has officially taken over control of Twitter, ending months of legal disputes with a $44 billion check.
It's 2004, and Elon has spent the last 2 years at SpaceX leading the team towards completing the first rocket. But at the same time, a new battery technology for electric vehicles gets Elon interested in another startup.
I got a test drive of the T0. I said, wow, this is really great. I founded the company to develop the Tesla Roadster.
Since Elon had a long-standing interest in electric vehicles, he decided to become the largest shareholder in the startup Tesla Motors. But there was one worry about this decision looming in his mind.
I did not want to create an electric car company and run it myself because I was running SpaceX. And my initial thought was, okay, I'll hire some people and work with a team and I'll just sort of work on the product design and sort of maybe the overall strategy or something.
Elon knew that SpaceX needed all his energy to become successful, so he restrained himself to only take on an adversary role at Tesla.
I had like about 180 million from PayPal. And I thought, I'll allocate half of that to SpaceX and Tesla and Solar City, and that should be fine. I'll have 90 million, like just lots.
Then in 2006, SpaceX was ready for the first launch attempt. 4 years of hard work was now up for the test. But already 30 seconds after launch, the engine caught on fire, which followed by a big explosion as the rocket fell to the ground. And the next day, the team went to gather rocket parts from the explosion in order to start over and build another rocket. And 1 year later, in 2007, it was time for their second launch attempt. But they lost control of the rocket, and once again, the vehicle fell to the ground. Besides SpaceX having 2 big losses in a row, Tesla was now also facing setbacks.
The Tesla financing round that we were raising fell apart because the economy was going to tailspin. Since I was doing SpaceX, I knew that if I did try to run it, it would be extremely painful. Tried hiring a couple of CEOs and I couldn't find the right person. Had a choice of basically commit all of my remaining resources to Tesla or it's going to die for sure. And I thought, okay, I got to bite the bullet and run the company because it's just too much at stake.
Elon was now simultaneously leading 2 extremely intricate and expensive startups. And then this happens.
Businesses have found it harder to borrow money. We are in the midst of a serious financial crisis.
The pressure on SpaceX to deliver was now getting critical. So in 2008, at the peak of the financial crisis, the company launched its third attempt.
We are hearing from the Launch Control Center that there has been an anomaly on the vehicle.
It was really terrible. Yeah. Everything was going wrong at once. 3 rocket failures in a row, and Tesla financing round was falling apart, getting divorced. I was very sad. I remember that Sunday before Christmas in 2008 thinking, this is the closest I've ever come to a nervous breakdown. I was within sight of it. I could see it. I really didn't want the companies to die, so I put all the money in the companies. Yeah. And then I had to borrow money from friends to pay living expenses. Yes.
As Elon tries his best to keep himself and his companies from falling apart, he discovers that even his childhood idols were against him.
You know, there are American heroes who don't like this idea. Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan have both testified against commercial spaceflight and the way that you're developing it.
I was very sad to see that because those guys are, yeah. You know, those guys are heroes of mine, so it's really tough. You know, I wish they would come and visit and see the hardware that we're doing here. And I think that would change their mind.
They inspired you to do this, didn't they?
Yes.
And to see them casting stones in your direction.
It's difficult.
Tesla almost went bankrupt. We closed our financing round 6 p.m. Christmas Eve, 2008. It was the last hour of the last day that it was possible. We would have gone bankrupt 2 days after Christmas otherwise. And I got divorced. That was like rough, man. Living a scar tissue there.
It poses a question, or maybe you just answer the question of why is no one else doing these things?
What's your pain threshold? Yeah, hope it's real high.
We were running on fumes at that point. We had virtually no money.
After the third failure, Elon gathered the top engineers into a meeting, which all thought they were up for verbal beating. But quite the opposite happened. He encouraged the team to refocus their disappointments and gather strength towards making a fourth and perhaps final launch attempt successful.
It's bad enough to have 3 strikes. Having 4 strikes, it's really kaput.
If you are still watching, it's probably because you are, like me, curious to know the recipe to this man's tenacity and success. What makes someone with over 100 million willing to risk it all and push themselves to the brink of insanity? Well, I believe a large part of the answer is found by understanding Elon's driving principle.
I'm a huge believer in the extension of life beyond Earth. Making life multiplanetary, I think, is one of the most important things we could do. Why is that important? Well, how do you say that anything is important? How do you judge importance? Well, if you look at things on an historical timescale, and the further you zoom out, the more the important stuff stays behind and the unimportant stuff, you can't see it anymore. And if you look at the multi-billion year history of life on Earth itself, you can really point to about half a dozen major steps on the evolution of life. There's obviously single-celled life, multicellular life, differentiation to plants and animals, life moving from the oceans to land, mammals, consciousness. On that scale also would fit, I think, the extension of life to multiple planets, so life becoming multiplanetary.
When I was a kid, I was wondering, what's the meaning of life? Why are we here? What's it all about? I came to the conclusion what really matters is trying to understand the right questions to ask. And the more that we can increase the scope and scale of human consciousness, the better we are able to ask these questions. Human civilization could come to an end. We're in this vast darkness of space, and there's this little candle of consciousness that's only really come about after 4.5 billion years. And it could just go out. Why we're here, how we got here, what the heck is going on. So my driving philosophy is to expand the scope and scale of consciousness that we may better understand the nature of the universe.
3, 2, 1. Lift off.
I think it's extremely important that life become multiplanetary. Say you zoom out really far and look at the entire history of Earth. It would be at least as important as life going from the oceans to land.
Being out there among the stars is important for the long-term survival of humanity, and it makes people excited about the future.
Stage separation.
Your separation confirmed.
I need a new nervous system. That was awesome. We've shown people we can do it, and this is just the first step in many. Ultimately, getting to Mars and things. The future of SpaceX is really great.
NASA called and told us that we'd won a $1.5 billion contract. And I couldn't even hold the phone. It's like, I just blurted out, I love you guys. That was definitely helpful.
My goal is to create content that is not just highly entertaining, but also incredibly inspirational, educational, and beautiful, all at the same time. But it does take a lot of time and effort to make, so I'm really relying on your support to keep this going. So if you like what I do and want to see the last 2 lessons in this story, you are more than welcome to come and watch it on my Patreon. In this exclusive video, we continue the story from when Elon stepped in as Tesla's 4th CEO back in 2008.
There have been like over 1,000 car company startups in the United States, and they're all dead.
I go deep into breaking down Elon's essential mindsets and decisions that led Tesla to become the success it is today, which also is what led Elon to become the richest man in the world. As a Patreon supporter, you also get access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content. So I thought I'd share a little bit quick on how I'm actually doing the recording. What I'm doing when I am doing the recording is that I record directly into Final Cut Pro. So this is name take 1, and I'm doing through this part, and then here on my right here I have the script. And a PDF research summary with all insights and lessons that I have learned, my scripts and QAs and more. You can watch the exclusive video right now or read more by visiting patreon.com/patrictarnhamn. But if you are hesitant to sign up right now, you can still grab a free version of the PDF research summary by clicking the second link in the description. Another great way you can support me is simply by sharing this video with your friends that you think will be inspired by it. And also don't forget to comment below which lesson you think was most inspirational and who do you want me to do a similar video on in the future. I will now close this chapter of Elon and once again open a new one. And this time it's gonna be about the controversial man whose rise to power resembles his equally fast-paced personality. I will look beyond the fancy watches, women and cars and try find out who is he, what does he know, and what can we all learn from him. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss when that's out. And until then, I leave you with this last fruitful word from Elon Musk. Thank you very much again. Bye.
If you want the future to be good, you must make it so. Take action to make it good, and it will be.